I'm going to start this video with a rather controversial opinion. I don't like the classic Mega Man formula. Now, before anyone gets angry at me, let me elaborate. The classic Mega Man games are absolutely amazing. Despite being decades old and being fairly challenging, there is still a charm and fun to be had with them, and is precisely why they are considered classics. That being said, the reason I personally don't like them comes down to one simple reason. I grew up with their successor, Mega Man X. Mega Man X took the classic formula and changed it completely. The movement system changed, you can dash, climb walls, you can charge your shots, and every level is full of secrets. It's one of those games I will consider perfect gaming experiences. Now, with that context in mind, it's safe to say that I have rather mixed feelings about Mighty No. 9. By now, 5 years after the game came out, the majority of people know of its troubled production, broken promises, and cringe-inducing marketing. Not to mention PR gems like "it's better than nothing." So I'm not gonna spend time going on about what happened behind the scenes. Instead, I want to focus my attention on what happened within the game itself. In Mighty No. 9, we play as Beck, the 9th robot of the Mighty No. series. We enter the story as something went wrong and robots in the entire country have gone insane, attacking humans and overtaking key locations. Beck not only finds himself unaffected by whatever is making the robots hostile somehow, but he can also absorb the corrupted data of these robots by dashing onto them once enough damage was dealt. With that knowledge, Beck sets out to stop his fellow Mighty Numbers to get rid of their infection and bring them back to their senses. And that is kind of a cool premise, actually. I like it because it's less about some evil scientist trying to take over the world, and more about trying to figure out what went wrong and fix it. In a better refreshing twist, rather than kill any of the bosses, Beck can instead absorb the corrupted data and essentially save them. While in Mega Man games, there is no choice but to put bosses down, seemingly for good in some cases. Now, being a spiritual successor to Mega Man and a Keiji Inafune game in general, the game is, well, it's Mega Man. You can eliminate enemies by damaging them and absorbing them with a dash, or by simply shooting them until they are destroyed. Though it's more advised to dash into them since there is a chance to gain a power-up depending on enemy colors. You can gain either extra damage, you can get a speed boost, or you can gain extra armor that lets you tank more damage and not get back so easily. In some other cases, you can gain 1 or 2 energy tanks that will refill your health instantly in case of emergency. This is when I start to feel mixed about the game. I'm not going to lie to you and I'm not going to bandwagon and label this game as terrible, because it is not. When it's good, the game gets extremely fun. I'm talking Mega Man X fast-paced and intense levels of fun. At its worst, however, the level design gets cheap and annoying. I don't mind dying in tough situations or taking damage. After all, that's what your health bar is for, to afford yourself to take a hit here and there on your way to the bosses. But it's a very different story when an unexplained mechanic or a cheaply placed enemy can knock you off a platform or into insta-kill surfaces. I also find it rather bizarre that not a single enemy drops health. You can get those from certain points in the levels, or dropped by assistant robots either during checkpoints or whenever you start dying too much. Not that it makes too much of a difference, mind you, because the game can be relatively easy. It's just weird not to see enemies dropping something this basic. Back on the positives. I love how creative the levels are in this game. True to its Mega Man roots, you get your typical caves, power stations, media towers, etc. But then, the game gets even more creative and has you chase a boss through a government building while avoiding sniper fire, trying to reach another one through high-speed traffic, or going into a very explosive oil refinery. It's those moments that make the game more unique and fun, and it also counts as a form of environmental storytelling. It gives you the illusion that Beck is in fact dealing with this conflict in real time as it's happening. Having previous bosses show up to assist you in certain sequences even adds to the experience because again, there is emphasis on having the robots come back to their senses rather than kill them. Which is much better and a lot more than what I could say about the writing and some of the cutscenes. The former makes a crucial mistake. Yes, this is trying to be a successor to Mega Man, but you have to remember this is also a brand new IP, so the mistake they are making is having the characters act and dump exposition as if we, the audience, were supposed to already know what is going on. Except we don't know any of these characters or the context behind what is really going on. And having the main cast exposit about it in spite of knowing each other for what seems like years only makes the delivery awkward regardless of the language or the voice acting. Look, I'm not a native English speaker, so bad voice acting doesn't exactly make much difference for me. What matters is how the voice acting is implemented. The rest of the cast likes to talk to you through radio as you complete the levels, and while some of the banter is pretty standard, they also do some unnecessary things. I don't need the comic relief character to freak out every time I have to face a gauntlet of enemies. I don't need mission control to tutorialize what I already saw tutorials for. I like hammy voice acting, but anyone making a story-driven game, please remember that you do not want the comic relief characters to overstay their welcome, because that is how they become obnoxious. Other than that, I thought the radio banter during levels was pretty serviceable, even if a little exposition dumpy at times. The only other thing I will have to criticize is the cutscenes themselves, or rather, what happens in them, which is nothing of substance really. On a technical level, it's just the character models talking to each other with very little body language and absolutely no lip sync on facial expressions. I get it, they wanted to make something cartoony, but if you are going to have characters talk to each other, at the very least make it more interesting instead of, well, this. But that's enough about the story, now let's get back into the gameplay. This being a Mega Man successor, it has one of the more important and more emblematic staples of Mega Man, and that is, of course, the bosses. I thought the mighty numbers are okay as bosses. They offer me a bit of a challenge and I actually found them quite refreshing. It helps a lot that every one of them have a lot of personality, and while they aren't infected with this weird program, they all got their own motivations of why they took over their respective stages. These bosses also do something different that I enjoy, and it is that all of them are DPS battles. In fact, the bulk of the gameplay is all about having the right DPS so you can set up your enemies for a dash attack. You can actually end boss fights pretty fast because, unlike in the Mega Man games, bosses don't really have iframes, so you can spam damage as soon as you get an opening and completely destroy your enemies, which can spice up the fast-paced gameplay and make for a fun challenge. So, if I enjoyed the game in general, why am I about to say something negative? Well, let me illustrate a problem like this. Another staple of Mega Man is that bosses can be defeated in two ways, either by simply using your default weapon, or by attacking them with their respective weaknesses. And while you can technically defeat all the mighty numbers with your main pea shooter, their DPS nature and some of their setup can make fighting them into a serious exercise in pain. Some of the bosses, while not having iframes per se, they do have certain attack patterns that you need to dodge or wait for them to finish before they open themselves to a counterattack. The problem is some of these bosses can attack you from a safe distance, and you get only mere seconds to deal damage with your main weapon. And in the case of a certain boss, I found myself getting stun locked because by the time she was open for an attack, she spams freezing projectiles and let's just say I got my first game over and felt genuine frustration over this one. What this means is that if you want to have some fun and a fighting chance, you have to fight their bosses with their respective weakness, which also means you have to fight them in a specific order to avoid frustration. Again, I had fun with this method, and I actually got a lot of enjoyment out of subsequent playthroughs like this, but this shouldn't have been the one optimal way to finish these bosses. Just to drive my point home further, let's use the original Mega Man X as an example. In Mega Man X, you can beat every boss with just the X-Buster. Yeah, the bosses are a bit harder like this, but you do have in fact a fighting chance. This means you can tackle the bosses in whichever order you want, from doing their weaknesses to just taking out whichever works best for you. Since we're on the subject of using Mega Man X as an example, I would like to also bring another criticism to this game, and it goes to the level design. The majority of the level design in this game is really good. There are low points like segments where you can die in one hit if you're not careful, or 100% precise in your dashing, but those are minor things. My critique is with some aspects of the level design. It's that there is really not much else to it. Going back to my example of Mega Man X, the levels in that game alone are loaded with replayability. There are hidden upgrades of all kinds, and there is even environmental changes that come as a consequence of beating previous levels. Mighty No. 9 does not have this. You can go through the motions and that's it really. No health upgrades, no armor upgrades for Bake. Yes, I know, this is more leaning towards classic Mega Man, but I honestly feel Mighty could have benefited from having more replayability to the stages. That being said, there is one change to the levels that I mentioned earlier, and it is that if you decide to go after a boss while carrying the weapon they are weak against, the boss you got that weapon from is going to show up to help you out, either by removing hazards or destroying enemies. It's actually a nice touch, and again it makes for some good environmental storytelling because we are seeing Beck's relationship with his family in action. It is nice. I just wish there was more memorable elements to the levels themselves. This is not helped by one more element I nearly forgot, and that is the power-ups. Now, remember I said enemies can give you a certain power-up depending on their color once you dash into them? That's about the extent of these drops. If you are lucky, sometimes enemies will drop an energy tank that you can use to heal yourself in case of emergency, but for some bizarre reason, this power-up is temporary. So if you die and you didn't use your energy tank, it's lost for good and you better pray enemies drop one, especially if you are heading for a boss. In general, Mighty No. 9 is a good game, but given the pedigree of Keiji Inafune and the widespread popularity of his Kickstarter campaign, people really expected better. It feels like this game should have reached a better potential, which makes the final product slightly disappointing. And you know what they say, it's easy to replace disappointing with bad, and it's even easier to replace bad with terrible. Playing the game now, 5 years later at the time of this recording, it's clear to me that the overly angry reaction to this game came from expectations being blown out of proportion, and the feeling that the budget wasn't used properly. Of course, the marketing and the PR didn't help their case either. We didn't need an online mode for this game. Whoever told Inafune that there should have been an online element to keep track of pointless high scores, or a multiplayer mode nobody asked for or cared about, should have seriously been fired for being so out of touch. There is a feeling that a lot of the time and resources wasted in these modes and a challenge mode that is honestly lackluster could have been used better in making sure the main story and the main levels reach their true potential, because we have in fact seen better from Inafune, and thankfully it looks like later releases did fulfill that potential. By the end of the day, I feel this game is worth experiencing. I do think it is a good game. Patches and driver updates have polished and changed this game for the better, and I genuinely had fun with my experience. If I don't have much else to say about this game, it's because either it breaks my no spoiler policy, or because there isn't much else to say that wouldn't be covered by simply playing it yourself. This is why I'm giving Mighty No. 9 a passable but decent 7 out of 10. If you see this game on sale and you feel you like to play an interesting piece of gaming history, I'll say give it a go. The only real fault to pin on this game is how it came short from meeting its true potential. But I don't think that warrants the foul legacy that a hurricane of PR nightmare seems to slap this game with. Because despite the disasters that plague this game, Inafune's dev team went on to make games that looks like they did a lot better. And I wouldn't mind giving those games a go because it's always good to see how developers learn from their mistakes and make future projects better as they grow in experience.